in this week's Parsha, in this weekly reading of Torah, we learn about many different fundamental commandments between people. Among others, of course, the most well-known mitzvah is mentioned in this weekly reading, when it says, "V'ahavta l'reacha kamocha," you should love a fellow like yourself. And this in itself requires quite a bit of discussion. How exactly is it possible? It's impossible to, if the Torah means that you have to give everybody what you'd give yourself. For instance, if a person comes to you and says, "I'm poor, give me half of your property. I don't have where to live, so why don't you let me live in your home forever?" You don't have to do that. There are all kinds of laws here involved, and generally it's accepted that what you have to do for others is what you'd expect them to do for you. As Chizkuni puts it, le re'echa. The preposition lamed here is to point out that it's not that you're fully supposed to do everything for others as what you do for yourself, but rather do for others what you want them to do for yourself, what you expect normal, the kindness that you would expect from other people to do for you, you should do for them. A kind of symmetric thing. But of course there are other explanations of this verse. Loving doesn't necessarily mean doing the same thing as what you do for yourself. Maybe loving here means wanting others to be successful, to have everything, because there are a lot of people out there that don't really want others to be better off than themselves. They don't mind that their neighbor is rich, but they want to be richer. They don't mind that their neighbor has successful children, but they want to have their children do better than the children of their neighbor, etc., etc. So that's what the Torah wants to stop. You need to love others and want the best for them. There's no competition here. Whatever is theirs is theirs. Whatever is yours is yours. They're not taking it away from you. Not like some people who assume that if somebody is rich, that must be that he's taking it away from the poor. No, it doesn't work like that. If somebody is rich, that's because he is rich. And there are laws that require that person to give some of his property and money to others, but they don't have to share everything. And this whole idea, the communist type of idea where everybody is sharing everything, never really worked too well. But on this particular video, I don't want to go too much into the mitzvah of v'ahavta l'reacha kamocha. I want to go into a different, also very crucial mitzvah. Of course, every religious Jew knows about this very well. The idea of Loshon Hara, the prohibition of gossiping and saying bad things about others, is learned from this very parsha. This is the one place in the Torah where it's pretty clearly the mitzvah of the prohibition of gossiping is mentioned. And this is how the Torah calls it. Lo telech rachil be'amecha. Do not walk as rachil among your people. What is rachil exactly? It's not a common word. In the 5 books of Moshe, it's only mentioned here once, but it is mentioned in other places, for instance, in the prophet Yechezkel and in Proverbs of Shlomo HaMelech, the book of Proverbs, Mishlei. For instance, there is a verse, Holech rachil migale sod. The one who tells secrets is considered a rachil. He is considered a gossiper. So the word rachil, according to some opinions, has to do with the similar root, regel, ragil. Regel is a leg. And rachil is a person who goes from place to place and tells people about different things and gossips. Gossipers usually walk around. That's why, by the way, the prohibition specifically says, do not walk as gossiper. It could have just said, do not be a gossiper, but it says, do not walk, meaning do not go around telling stories. This is what this one said, this is what this one did. Now, Chofetz Chaim, of course, that's not a name of a person. Chofetz Chaim is the one of the most famous books written in the previous century. It's a book about the laws of prohibition of rachilut, of gossiping, and Loshon Hara, bad language. So the author, whose name was Rabbi Yisroel Meir HaKohen, who lived in what today is Belarus, used to be part of Poland between the two world wars. So he distinguishes between rachilut and Loshon Hara. Loshon Hara is a term used by rabbis, literally bad language. So he distinguishes between badmouthing and spreading and saying gossiping, rachilut. And this is his distinction. The way he understands, and it's not just him, there are other sages that understand it that way. The way they understand the difference is that Loshon Hara, that is the bad language, is when a person tells about something that someone did or said or whatever, something that's not a good thing. Basically, telling about other people's, whether it's sins, whether it's just something improper, or something that may damage them in some way, telling that to other people would be Loshon Hara. Now, of course, there are all kinds of exclusions, which I'm going to get into in a moment. But generally speaking, that's called bad language. So what's then rachilut? What's the specific term that's used in our weekly reading? Rachilut is when you specifically say to the person to whom it applies that somebody did something or said something about him. You see the difference? If I say, for instance, that such and such person is really not so righteous as people think, or he's not really that smart, that would be Loshon Hara. But if I tell my neighbor, such and such person, he said such a thing about you, or he thinks you're an idiot, or he did this and this to you, that would be rachilut. Now, the Chofetz Chaim, the author of Chofetz Chaim, divides his book actually into two different parts. One is the prohibition of Loshon Hara, and one is the prohibition of rachilut. And the two parts are actually very similar. I don't know why he had to do that, because most laws are incredibly similar between those two. And he often says actually in the notes that he already explained in the first part of the book, whatever applies in this part. So a lot of times it's in a way a repetition of sorts. But he divides it that way. Now what seems to be the case though is that the word rachilut includes both. The Torah, of course, doesn't use the term Loshon Hara. It's a rabbinical term, bad language. So rachilut may include a lot of different things. It obviously has to do with saying things. Rachilut is clearly something that has to do with talking. But what kind of talking? So it includes all kinds of gossiping and bad language and apparently many other things as well. And there are, in fact, in the words of Chazal and in the words of Talmud, a few other interpretations of the word rachil, which I'm not going to go into right now. But the main accepted interpretation that it means a gossiper, and includes all kinds of Loshon Hara as well. So basically, rachilut is a biblical term, and Loshon Hara is a rabbinical term. And to some extent, maybe they could be used interchangeably. You don't have to always be so precise about the exact difference. And it could be that what Loshon Hara includes sometimes rachilut, and rachilut includes Loshon Hara. The truth of the matter is that Chofetz Chaim, when he starts his book, and some people learn it, by the way, every day. There is even an English edition called Chofetz Chaim, a lesson a day. They didn't really actually translate the book of Chofetz Chaim. They rather wrote for half a year, actually. The cycle is to finish the entire book in about half a year. So they didn't actually translate the book of Chofetz Chaim there. They rather used it as a kind of trampoline and bring a lot of situations from today's day and age, from different situations that one can find him or herself in, and many good examples. And generally, this book actually includes two parts. One is a kind of musar, a kind of ethical part that is based not on the book of Chofetz Chaim, but a different book by the same author called Shmirat HaLashon, Shmiras HaLoshon, guarding of one's language. So that book is not so much halachic, it's an ethical book, it's a book of musar. So on the one side of the book Chofetz Chaim, a lesson a day, they would have a piece from one work, or adapted from that work, and another from Chofetz Chaim itself, from the book that's halachic. Of course, there's no clear distinction, and a lot of things in the book of Chofetz Chaim are also closer to musar than to halacha. But the main emphasis is on specific guidelines of halacha. So one of the most important parts of course, the book of Chofetz Chaim itself and the book Chofetz Chaim, a lesson a day that's based on it, is when is it permitted? Because you cannot forbid people to ever say anything that can damage somebody else. Because then, let's say a person is looking for a shidduch, wants to marry, he or she when they're proposed, they're given a candidate, how would they ever find out anything about that candidate? Let's say a girl calls a rabbi of that boy and wants to know more about this boy. And the rabbi thinks, I can't tell her anything bad. After all, it's Loshon Hara, it's bad language. Of course not. There are exclusions. And that has to do with warning a person. And that's why our verse actually continues, do not walk as a gossiper among your people. But also it says, do not stand on the blood of your friend, your fellow. So Rabbi Chaim Volozhin, a great student of the Vilna Gaon, maybe the greatest of his students, used to say that the reason these two mitzvot are together is because you're not allowed to abstain from saying something that's damaging if you're trying to save somebody. Do not stand on somebody's blood. So if a person, for instance, wants to kill somebody, you obviously have to warn the victim, the potential victim, of his intent, even though it would be Loshon Hara otherwise. But here you're trying to save a person. So this law applies not only in the case of actual danger for life, of course, but even if it's not danger for life. A person wants to become a business partner, a person wants to marry somebody. In all the cases that you have information about the other side, and you want to warn that fellow, you're allowed to do that. But there are a lot of conditions. That's why this book is so long. I cannot tell you in just a few words all the details of when you're allowed to warn and when not. A lot depends on how well you know the information. Not just rumors, but you actually know the information. What if you just heard from others that this such and such person is not really reliable in business, or he's a bad worker? Are you allowed to warn someone who wants to hire that person that this is a bad worker? Well, all you did is you heard something. There were some rumors. When and what you're allowed to say. Very complex. And that's why I do recommend the book of Chofetz Chaim, A Lesson a Day, for people to read. It's really, all of this is very complex. Sometimes there may be room even to permit discussing certain things that would otherwise be Loshon Hara, if it's for the benefit of, for instance, of a psychologist who's trying to help a client, right? Normally, you're not allowed to discuss people. You're not allowed to say bad things about people. But sometimes it's needed for psychological health, or a husband for a wife. But there are specifically conditions for all that. Even when it's allowed, you're not allowed to believe exactly what you hear. You're allowed to give advice. You're allowed to try to pacify the client, the victim, but you're not allowed to believe everything they say. They may have their own opinion, and maybe they misunderstood actually what happened. A lot of times, by the way, a lot of the quarrels that happen is because the people don't understand what actually happened. That may have to do with another mitzvah, also in this week's parsha. We learn, B'tzedek tishpot amitecha, judge your fellow righteously. The simple meaning is that a judge has to be righteous and has to judge according to the case before him, not simply because he has pity on someone or because this person is too important to be found guilty. You have to judge with righteousness, b'tzedek. But our sages say that also includes a regular person, not a judge. That you have to judge others to, when you see their actions, to be as favorable as possible. Let's say you see a religious Jew who is sitting in McDonald's. Are you supposed to think that he's eating non-kosher? No. You're supposed to assume that there is a reason why he entered McDonald's for whatever reason. Maybe he needs to talk to his non-Jewish business partner or something. Or maybe it was raining outside and he entered because he was trying to save himself from rain. Now, I'm not discussing whether he should have done it and whether there's a problem that he's creating an impression that he's doing something wrong. But whatever the case may be, you're not supposed to judge people unfavorably. And a lot of times the quarrels happen because people think that somebody did something bad to them without knowing all the details, or because they heard some Loshon Hara. So again, there's one person who did something that could be interpreted in various ways, but the person who told the third party about it, that middleman here, the one that transgressed rachilut, the prohibition of being a gossiper, he also judged that person unfavorably, and the way he brought this story sounded like it's a lot worse than it actually was. And this person broke the prohibition of listening to Loshon Hara and heard it all and believed what he heard and judged this person unfavorably. And now they hate each other. Or rather, he hates that person, which will ultimately bring probably the hatred from the other side too. So they broke another prohibition, again in this week's Parsha, do not hate a fellow in your heart. So there are a lot of different prohibitions that people break through judging unfavorably, through talking about each other and bringing gossip and all kinds of things. And all of this is in this week's Parsha. All of these prohibitions are in this week's Parsha. So the Chofetz Chaim, before he starts his great book, he lists various prohibitions that are included in Loshon Hara, meaning a person who breaks the prohibition of gossiping, he or she also breaks all kinds of other prohibitions and positive commandments. And the Chofetz Chaim lists some of them they don't always break, some of them they break all the time. For instance, there's a special prohibition not to be like Korach and his company, not to basically participate in quarrels. Many times Loshon Hara leads to quarrels and things like that. So a lot of different prohibitions. And of course, the first mitzvah from which we started this lesson, the loving a fellow like yourself, certainly one breaks that prohibition by talking Loshon Hara or listening and believing what he or she heard. Imagine, you don't want others to think that you're a bad guy, so therefore don't believe when people say about somebody else that they're the bad people. And don't listen to it, and certainly don't talk about it. So that's the various prohibitions in this week's Parsha and various positive commandments that all have to do with relationships between people. A lot of the laws in this week's Parsha are about relationships between people, how to build a healthy society where people love each other, want good for each other, help each other, do not judge each other unfavorably, and do not spread rumors about each other. And if you like this video, please press like.